truth is the most convincing story that maps onto reality, and that's why the central narrative is falling apart.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
We must see the central narrative for the fiction that it is. We are Americans.
While elections are sometimes messy, this was a secure election.
The founders began the fight for human liberty and self-governance, and it's up to us to finish the job.
I'll tell you what, we are in a truth emergency right now.
This is the end game.
It's Thursday, August 22nd, 2024, the 1310th day of dystopia. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. A warm welcome and hello to all of you listening to the podcast via a paid subscription at I'mYourModerator.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber for as little as $50 a year or $5 a month, and in doing so, you will get the ad-free experience. You'll be able to participate in the conversation over on Substack, and you'll be invited to the interactive live stream every Wednesday afternoon. And if you can't or you simply don't want to, continue listening to the podcast for free on Substack, a wide variety of podcast platforms, and of course, Rumble. All I ask is that you share it with your friends. You can find the links to the podcast, the writing, the social media, and the merch site by visiting linktree.com/I'mYourModerator. Anyone who understands the roller coaster we've been on these past few years knows we haven't reached the end yet, and there may still be hard times to come. And as we add $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days, we could be headed for some shaky financial times. If you're like me, you're figuring out how to diversify and make sure some seeds are planted for whatever may come. And that's one of the many reasons I think Bitcoin is part of our future. But it's not only about money. Bitcoin looks to be a critical part of the next generation of technology, communications, energy, verification, and even national defense. I'd encourage everyone to do their research and do it now. And if you're convinced of the likelihood that Bitcoin is an essential part of our future, then you'll need an on-ramp. I recommend River. River empowers you to grow your portfolio without any unwanted surprises and eliminates third-party custodians, putting you in control of your assets. Open an account with no minimum purchase requirement. You can get your Bitcoin journey started with just $1. Visit partner.river.com/reasonable to create your River account today. That's partner.river.com/reasonable. Now, I know that many of you out there understand the need to diversify assets, or maybe you're looking to protect your retirement savings, but you're not quite there yet on Bitcoin, and you feel better about precious metals. I get that too. I think going in multiple directions is wise, and I do that myself. And when it comes to buying precious metals, you want to be working with a good company, and that's why I've partnered with Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time Inc. 5000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And I have gotten silver from Goldco. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to reasonablegold.com now. This is your opportunity to protect you and your family from an out-of-control government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer. Take action today. Click on the link in the podcast notes or go to reasonablegold.com now and get your free gold kit, your free IRA kit. You'll be glad you did. Okay, so before we get started on what I want to talk about today, I do want to share with you a poll from Rasmussen that I saw after we ended the live stream yesterday. Now, to be clear, I'm not sharing this poll so that you believe the numbers on it, and I'm not even sharing it to comment on the directionality of it, which is usually the only thing worth mentioning in these polls. how they change over time while people's beliefs change. If that is actually a phenomenon we observe, and it's not just the other way around, honestly, it might be. Now, I appreciate Rasmussen polling because Mark Mitchell is the one guy out there really committed to giving MAGA a fair shake, and he is also honest about where polling in general has some shortcomings. Now, in my opinion, those shortcomings kind of invalidate the entire institution, and I think that everyone is probably going to understand that at some point as we draw close to this election or in the post-election period. But maybe it's not as bad as I think it is, and maybe he has a point. Whatever it is, I believe that he is doing his best with what he has to work with and admitting where the shortcomings are. So with that said, he posted this yesterday on X, formerly Twitter. We polled 7 states this week. Republican Senate candidates lag Trump in all of them by an average of 9 points. Leader McConnell, what you up to? So he's saying that Republican Senate candidates are running 9 points behind Donald Trump on average in the states he'd polled. Arizona, Trump's up too, so we are obviously off to a bad start already because that's absurd. But Trump's up by 2 while the senatorial candidate is down by 8, and that is Kari Lake, by the way, so that's strange. And so we have a 10-point difference there. Michigan, Trump is down 1, ridiculous, and the Senate candidate is only down 2, also ridiculous, but a difference of 1. Montana, Trump is up 23, the Senate candidate is up 7, so that's a difference of 16, and you go through Nevada, where Trump is doing 13 points better than the senatorial candidate. Ohio, where he's doing 12 better than Bernie Moreno, who's a strongly endorsed Trump candidate. It doesn't make sense at all, except they're going to say that Sherrod Brown, the incumbent, is so strong there. Pennsylvania, it's a 4-point difference. Wisconsin, it's a 9-point difference. So after years of being told that Donald Trump is holding back the Republican Party, MAGA and MAGA candidates are holding back the establishment wing of the Republican Party from winning. We are the reason they're losing. Now Donald Trump is running on average 9 points better than the Republican Senate candidate in 7 different states, according to Rasmussen. Now, don't get me wrong. Donald Trump is absolutely more popular than the Republican establishment. But unless you're as far down the road as we are, and not that many people are, if you're voting for Trump, you're going to vote for the other Republicans. This isn't 2016 where people are happy to take a wild card rather than what's on offer from the establishment. It's been 8 more years since then. People know who Donald Trump is. Disaffected Democrats and independents who have left Joe Biden and Kamala Harris behind for Donald Trump are not going to stick with their Democrat senator. Arizona's going to go back to being a red state, but they're also going to elect Ruben Gallego over Kari Lake, who was robbed in the governor's race just 2 years ago. It makes no sense unless you're setting up a future narrative about how the country rejected the Democrat Party at president. They wanted to give Donald Trump one more chance. But they also voted for divided government because they didn't want Donald Trump to have all the power with a Republican House and Senate backing him or Republicans in the states. They need to sell the idea to the American people that even if everyone has decided Donald Trump's okay, they don't like him enough to just vote Republican up and down the ticket. People won't believe that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump after Robert F. Kennedy brings his supporters along. But they will believe when they're told that their state government went Democrat over and over and over again. And that might have some effect when Jamie Raskin attempts to have the Congress disqualify Donald Trump. And regardless, it creates the scenario where even if they have to give in on Donald Trump, they still stack uniparty candidates down ballot, House and Senate, all throughout state and local governments so they can subvert the next Donald Trump term and keep on going with their election fraud apparatus intact. We've been talking about this for months. These are the sorts of signs you would expect to see if they are choosing to go that route. Think about everyone you know Even the more liberal people, the independents, the standard issue villagers, people who don't know anything at all about politics but still have opinions about politics. Do you know anyone who's more in favor of Democrats right now than they were 4 years ago? I would suggest the only people who would fit that identity are people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 and will definitely vote for Joe Biden again. I would guess that basically everyone else has a worse impression of Democrats today than they had 4 years ago, and a better impression of Donald Trump than they had 4 years ago. Some of that is about Donald Trump, but a lot of it is seeing what the Democrats, and more importantly, the Uniparty, are actually driving toward. People are seeing through the illusion right to what they actually are, what they actually represent, what they actually want, and who they actually serve. They're not seeing competence and kindness and caring. They're not seeing success and winning. They're not seeing a return to normalcy or decency. They're not seeing the adults back in the room. They're seeing a disaster that expands by the day. They just saw a Trump assassination event, and then they saw Joe Biden essentially removed from his presidency and his campaign because some unnamed people decided it had to be that way. There aren't Trump supporters out there who are like, yeah, I'm going to stick with Trump. But, you know, I've been thinking, I'm really going to vote for Democrats down ballot. Now, again, maybe there are the most based people in the world responding to this poll. And they're like, yeah, everyone besides Trump is a member of the Uniparty. So I'm actually not going to vote down ballot at all. But come on, no one's like that, except maybe me and like 8 of you. All right, so I just wanted to point that out. We will see how that progresses. Maybe I'm way off, totally possible. But just like Donald Trump is always mid-negotiation, so is the regime. They want to get the best possible outcome. The best possible outcome would be everyone believing that Donald Trump would actually lose to someone like Kamala Harris or whoever she's replaced with. If they can't accomplish that, well, then they got to have Donald Trump win, at least if they're going to preserve their system. And then their best option at that point would be a Donald Trump win, uniparty everywhere, down ballot, state, local. Keep the system in place, subvert Donald Trump for a few more years, push the agenda ahead while you can, and live to fight another day. And so that means they need to try to convince the country that regardless of how much the people might like Donald Trump, they don't want a Republican House and Senate in there to support Trump. So we should expect to see narratives building in that direction. All right, so I guess we have to spend at least a few minutes on the Democrat National Convention because apparently that's the only thing happening in the world right now. All the major news sites are running DNC stories as their front page, whole bunch of headlines below that main story. It's all DNC this week. And that's also true for the new alternative mainstream media that is quote unquote on the right. They've taken turns attending the DNC in disguise. Oh, look, we're totally fooling these libs. I'm wearing a disguise. They don't even know that I'm the guy who produces 24/7 trans content. That's my Matt Walsh impression. He went to the DNC in disguise, totally owned the libs. He poured entire cups worth of liberal tears so that he could bring them back for Michael Knowles. And he even kidnapped Tim Walz's son, thinking that he was Kyle Rittenhouse. And if you haven't seen the video of Tim Walz's son, he's basically a perfect cross between Kyle Rittenhouse crying on the witness stand and Brendan Fraser spazzing out at the Golden Globes. Matt Walsh's disguise allowed him to accomplish all of this. He's one of the greatest secret agents of all time. He pretends not only to be an independent journalist, but also anti-woke while making trans content 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's amazing. But conning television characters in disguise wasn't the only excitement at the DNC this week. They also had pop stars. It's a vibes-based campaign. They're trying to project an image of popularity since no popularity actually exists. That's why they've hired Twinkle Toes Tim Walz to prance around every stage he can find, like that amateur b-boy break dancer who somehow made it into the Olympics. Here is our mainstream media of objective journalists telling you their objective opinion about how what you saw on television was even so much better in person. In fact, if you didn't think it was that great at home, oh, you should have been there. Then you would have realized it was great.
It was though someone had plugged in a cable, a current was connected, and there was pure electricity in the room.
Thank you for sharing with us some of the electricity.
The energy is incredibly electric.
You know, it was just electric.
Sort of electric, as I've ever seen it. It was absolutely electric.
Talk to me about the atmosphere in here. Is it electric? Excitement. It is electric. Senator Schumer wasn't lying when he was saying that there's a lot of electricity and excitement right now.
So it's incredibly electric.
It's electric. Something just got uncorked.
Room in Chicago, quite electric tonight.
Last night was electric.
It'll be electric. Electrifying.
The electrification.
There's electricity in this room, there's energy in this room, and there is enthusiasm in this room.
A lot of electricity and energy in this hall across this country like we have never seen.
Not even with Barack Obama in 2008?
I think this rivals Barack Obama in 2008.
Okay.
This rivals Barack Obama in 2008. Prior to Joe Biden, the most popular presidential candidate ever. He got 69 million votes. It was unbelievable. Neither Donald Trump nor Hillary Clinton got that many votes in 2016. And then both Donald Trump and Joe Biden surpassed that in 2020. It was crazy. A full 20% increase in turnout, even during the very deadliest pandemic of all time. Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes. Donald Trump's total went up 11 or 12 million. And despite that, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump's new record by another 7 million. But if that Biden-Harris ticket didn't come along, even the suggestion that a Democrat could rile up supporters like Barack Obama, that would be crazy. I wonder why they didn't ask, I think that was Jamie Harrison from the DNC. I wonder why they didn't ask him if this was even more excitement than he saw for Joe Biden in 2020, because Joe Biden set the record. He even bragged about it the other night. But the DNC is electric. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, night one. I mean, Joe Biden was kind of morning two. By the time they put him on, everyone had already turned their TVs off and gone to bed, if they had their TVs on in the first place. Who is even watching this thing? Night two featured Barack Hussein Obama and Michael Robinson Obama. And night three featured Bill Clinton, Tim Walz, and a spastic Kyle Rittenhouse crying on the witness stand and also playing Tim Walz's son. Here's a review of the Bill Clinton moment from CNN's Scott Jennings that somehow they allowed to be broadcast.
Bill Clinton makes me think about my dad in Western Kentucky. You know, when I was growing up out there, my dad and all the other guys like my dad, blue-collar guys, they love Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. All Clinton guys. And now my dad and every single one of them that I know, all Donald Trump guys. And when I see him come out here tonight and I think about the audience in this convention, I think the Democratic Party did once have a bunch of people who Bill Clinton would appeal to. I think they're gone. I think the people who, the blue-collar labor piece of the Democratic Party that propelled Bill Clinton in the 90s has completely and totally migrated over to Donald Trump. And so I wonder about the younger audience and how they view somebody like Bill Clinton today, because he's not a blue-collar hero to them. They know a lot of other things about him that, frankly, make me wonder how in the world he still makes these kinds of stages, to be honest.
Oh, I can answer that. It's because they're all moral relativists, and they have designated Trump and his supporters taking any active role in choosing the direction of the country as the greatest threat to humankind that has ever existed. Is Bill Clinton a rapist and a pervert? Who cares? Is his wife a treasonous murderer? Who cares? But speaking of Michelle Obama, here she is.
We will never benefit from the affirmative action of generational wealth. If we bankrupt a business, if we bankrupt a business or choke in a crisis, we don't get a second, third, or fourth chance. If things don't go our way, we don't have the luxury of whining or cheating others to get further ahead. No. We don't get to change the rules so we always win. If we see a mountain in front of us, we don't expect there to be an escalator waiting to take us to the top. No.
Now that's kind of amazing. Speaking of communists coming out of the closet and their pride movement beginning, she just called the creation and the passing of generational wealth affirmative action. The Supreme Court ruled affirmative action doesn't fly anymore. So now a bunch of Nepo babies are going to redefine it as anything parents pass down to their children? You're not allowed to get wealthy and take care of your own future generations? These people are nuts. But this whole thing is backwards. I talked the other day about the total inversion within the false reality that we are seeing at the DNC. They're not allowed to cheat to win. They're not allowed to change the rules to make sure they always win. These are the people who are pretending Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes and is a legitimate president. They changed the rules. They literally changed the election rules throughout 2020 on the basis of the very deadly pandemic that wouldn't have and couldn't have affected the elections in any way at all. And without those changes, they could not have won. We have gone over all that countless times. On the live stream yesterday, we talked a bit about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and how he has accused the Democrats of interfering in elections, in cheating in elections. He's talked about the problems with the machines before. He's talked about how they wouldn't schedule a debate between himself and Joe Biden, and how they've been suing to deny him ballot access. And he's not the only one. Kaneko the Great pointed this out today on X, formerly Twitter, citing the perennial Green Party candidate, Dr. Jill Stein, who, quote, tweeted a shorter version of that same video from Michelle Obama and said, "Stop the gaslighting. Right now, the Democrats are trying to sue us off multiple state ballots, hiring spies and infiltrators to sabotage us, and even withholding public funds we qualified for months ago. Democrats absolutely cheat and change the rules to maintain their grip on power." Another account that goes by People for Jill Stein said the party of fairness and democracy for you, hiring infiltrators, hiring an army of lawyers to throw Jill Stein off the ballot, stockpiling cash and staff to coordinate a campaign to silence and sabotage third parties, denying federal matching funds. And it's funny, if you remember, the Uniparty for a long time was thinking about setting up their own uniparty third-party option. There was Andrew Yang's Forward Party, and we just discussed the word forward and its historical meaning a few days ago. And we had the No Labels effort with people like Evan McMullin and Liz Cheney being discussed. And that would have been just fine, because then they could have told the country, these are mainstream Republicans and conservatives who are casting an anti-Trump vote. But Jill Stein wouldn't be any help, narratively speaking, so it's better to just keep her out of the conversation altogether. So Tim Walz, after a few sachets and pirouettes, finally made it to the podium and gave his speech. But before we get to that, here's who introduced Tim Walz. He is apparently one of Tim Walz's students who he coached in middle school. And he tells a story about how Tim Walz became a middle school basketball and track coach, even though he was really a high school football coach. And it's because there was a kid at the school who couldn't afford school lunches, so Tim Walz took 2 extra jobs. What kind of story is this?
Not for high school football, but for 7th grade basketball and track. So what was a high school football coach doing, coaching 7th grade basketball and track? Well, there was a kid in the high school who couldn't afford to pay for lunch, and he ran up a lot of debt. And Tim and Gwen decided they'd help pay it off. They started calling around the district to see if there were any positions they could fill to make a little extra money, and that's how he wound up coaching us 7th graders. That's right. Coach Walz got us excited about what we might achieve together. He believed in us, and he helped us believe in each other. And his leadership stuck. That track team went on to win a state title, just like the football team. That's right. Speaking of which, come on out, Scarlets. Yeah.
So let's think about the story we were just told. Tim Walz and his wife got together to figure out a way that they could pay off a child's lunch debt. The child had racked up so much lunch debt that Tim Walz and his wife began seeking out new jobs in order to pay off this child's lunch debt. Where was this kid going to lunch? Was he taking clients to the Ivy? He goes into school every day and just forges his dad's signature so he can leave school during lunch period and knock back a few martinis? The kid was like Matthew McConaughey in Wolf of Wall Street? What in the world is that story? Honestly, did AI write that? And who was the kid in debt to? Did he have a tab with the cafeteria lady? Was he getting loaded down at the ice cream truck? It's all just so absurd. Between that strange story about how Tim Walz and his wife had to get second jobs in order to pay off a $40 a month lunch debt for someone else's kid, and Tim Walz entering, prancing and waving and bowing and tumbling like it was a gymnastics routine, CBS went and talked to Oprah backstage. She was wearing a revolutionary purple suit just to add to the electricity a little bit. And then we cut to old Twinkle Toes Tim Walz. Like everyone else, he focused most of his time on Donald Trump and how scary and dangerous Trump and MAGA were. They were going to tear down our democracy and try to snip off your private parts. Oh, no, wait, that's them. Here's what Republicans are definitely going to do under Donald Trump.
Some folks just don't understand what it takes to be a good neighbor. Take Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Their Project 2025 will make things much, much harder for people who are just trying to live their lives. They spent a lot of time pretending they know nothing about this. But look, I coached high school football long enough to know, and trust me on this, when somebody takes the time to draw up a playbook, they're going to use it. And we know if these guys get back in the White House, they'll start jacking up the costs on the middle class. They'll repeal the Affordable Care Act. They'll gut Social Security and Medicare. And they will ban abortion across this country, with or without Congress. Here's the thing. It's an agenda nobody asked for. It's an agenda that serves nobody except the richest and the most extreme amongst us. And it's an agenda that does nothing for our neighbors in need. Is it weird? Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's also wrong. And it's dangerous. It's not just me saying so.
That is completely and totally detached from reality. 2025 is not Donald Trump's agenda. He has disavowed it many times. The conservative establishment created that agenda. And Tim Walz is basically saying, because Republicans created that agenda, it's actually Donald Trump's agenda. And we can pretend Donald Trump supports all those ideas, even though Donald Trump doesn't support all those ideas. And it's especially funny that they are trying to tie Donald Trump to an agenda that's not his, when Kamala Harris still doesn't even have an agenda. You can go to KamalaHarris.com. There is still nothing on that website. It's a bio for Kamala, a bio for Tim Walz, a merch site, a place you can leave your email, and a donation portal. There is no agenda. She talked a little bit about her economic plans last week, which of course aren't her plans. She's just speaking out some plans. And everyone realized immediately that she was advocating for communism. And because there's still no Kamala Harris agenda, the RNC created a website for Kamala Harris's agenda, and they described it in their own terms. You can check the website out. It's Kamala2024policies.com. Kamala Harris's dangerous policies are nothing to laugh about, it says at the top of the page, with 3 pictures of Kamala cackling. Below it says, Border Czar Kamala Harris opened the southern border to illegal alien criminals and deadly fentanyl, and as vice president was the tie-breaking vote for far-left spending bills that raised taxes and sent prices skyrocketing for families across the country. While Harris has tried to rewrite history on her extreme record, she can't hide from her promises to set murderers free, dismantle America's border security, raise costs with massive spending bills, bring back the Green New Deal scam, eliminate private health insurance, and more. And then there are subsections about what Kamala Harris intends to do based on her prior statements, policies she's advocated for or pursued during her time as California AG or California Senator or fake vice president. And I suppose that is fair game. If you are going to tie Donald Trump to an agenda that he explicitly disavows and Kamala Harris refuses to make one in the first place, I guess you simply have to do your best to describe what it is she has actually pursued in the past and see if she disavows any of it. And of course, none of that is going to happen because every agenda item that Kamala Harris has supported in her past as the most liberal person in the Senate, well, the people who control Kamala Harris want even more of that than they ever wanted before. So certainly she's going to be pursuing that agenda. There's only 2 directions here, uniparty or with the people. And by the way, as for Kamala Harris being the most liberal person in the Senate, she was asked about this by Norah O'Donnell of CBS News a few years ago, back toward the beginning of the fake administration.
You're very different in the policies that you've supported in the past. You're considered the most liberal United States senator.
Somebody said that, and it actually was Mike Pence on the debate stage. But
yeah, well, actually, the nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator. You supported the Green New Deal. You supported Medicare for all. You've supported legalizing marijuana. Joe Biden doesn't support those things. So are you going to bring the policies, those progressive policies that you supported as senator, into a Biden administration?
What I will do, and I promise you this, and this is what Joe wants me to do, this was part of our deal. I will always share with him my lived experience as it relates to any issue that we confront. And I promised Joe that I will give him that perspective and always be honest with him.
And is that a socialist or progressive perspective?
No. No, it is the perspective of a woman who grew up a black child in America, who was also a prosecutor, who also has a mother who arrived here at the age of 19 from India, who also, likes hip hop. Like, what do you want to know?
Well, I want to give you the opportunity to address this.
And that video is hard to watch. The second time she is challenged, she looks like she is considering starting to cry for effect so that Norah O'Donnell will know that she's not going to get an answer on this question and she'd better reel it back a little bit. She looks insane. It was like emotional hostage taking or a failed attempt at emotional hostage taking. But let's get back to Tim Walz's comments. He said Donald Trump was going to press for a national abortion ban. And this is something we've talked about a bunch of times. Donald Trump was on Fox News this morning to comment on exactly that.
They say in the I want a federal ban. I would never, and they know I've said it, there will not be a federal ban. This is now back in the states where it belongs. And again, every Democrat, every Republican, everybody wanted Roe v. Wade terminated and brought back to the states. Then about 10 years ago, they started talking about the number of weeks and the number of this and that. No. Right now, it's in the hands of the people. The people in the individual states are voting. I did something that's going to bring our country together eventually. But because they lie so much at this convention, they make it sound like it's I want a federal ban. Won't happen. Right. It's not going to happen. It's in the hands of the states.
Right.
And it is in the hands of the states. In our current political environment, there is no way that a national abortion ban could be passed through the Congress, through the Senate, and then signed by a President Donald Trump. That is purely impossible. There is zero chance of that happening. Unless elections are fixed before a Congress and Senate are sat, there is no way a national abortion ban would pass either house. There is not even going to be motion toward a national abortion ban. They are just hoping that standard issue villagers on the uniparty left will understand Trump bad and take that to mean Trump will do whatever bad thing they can think of. And the reason they'll take it that way is because they've been conditioned to take it that way for 9 years now. Trump can tell them there is no way there will be a national abortion ban. It is back in the hands of the states now. People wanted it back in the states. I appointed Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, and now it's back in the states. A national abortion ban bill will never come to his desk, and if it did, under this system, he wouldn't sign it. Now, if we had legitimate elections and we had legitimate representatives and senators all around the country, and it turned out that an abortion ban had overwhelming support among the people, then who knows? But we're a long way off from that moment. And the truth is, the conversations that would be necessary to reach broad agreement on abortion policy haven't even really started because the issue has simply been demagogued for so long, which is partly a factor of how much money goes into supporting both sides of that controlled opposition dynamic, including to all those people grifting off the pro-life cause. And that's not to say the pro-life position is wrong or grifting, just that there's also a Pro-Life Incorporated who get paid a whole lot of money to look like they're trying really hard while losing on behalf of pro-life Americans. Now, because the starring men in the Democrat Party include two old decrepit perverts in Joe Biden and Bill Clinton, a gay man in Barack Obama, a prancing weirdo who high-fives his wife in Tim Walz, and a guy who spends his life pretending to love Kamala Harris, they're having a really hard time projecting masculinity. And of course, this is going to be a problem if you spend all the rest of your time pushing a marketing campaign about how bad traditional masculinity is and how no one should aspire to it. And because no traditional or authentic masculinity exists within the party, they always try to mask it with tough talk. Like when Joe Biden would talk about how he was going to take Donald Trump back behind the school and hit him with a 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2. He's really going to suck it to him. He's going to lay a hurtin' on Donald Trump, and that'll show him a thing or two. Here's the deal. That's how we do it in Scranton. Come on, man. And just like with the communism, they can no longer hide their disdain for traditional, authentic masculinity. And they can no longer project that they possess any of it. So now they're coming out and celebrating the fact that they're just a different kind of man. Sure, it's less masculine and in some cases not masculine at all, but you can't say that. So they're going to need something else, maybe trans-masculine. Oh, I'm not sure if that's right. We're going to have to workshop that. But regardless, they're creating a new brand and they're getting some help from the go-to propaganda magazine of the wannabe elite, The Atlantic, owned by Steve Jobs' widow. Here's a staff writer called Helen Lewis, who has written important pieces like "It's Time to Lift the Female Lockdown" and "The Pandemic Has Given Women a New Kind of Rage." Here's her headline from this morning. "She's everything. He's just Doug." Democrats try a new model of masculinity. She's everything. He's just Doug. Don't take it from me. That's his official title. Here at the United Center in Chicago, state delegates at the Democrat National Convention are given placards to wave during the speeches. The first night was dominated by "We Love Joe" and "Union, yes," interspersed with the campaign's battle cry, "We fight, we win." For the speech by the second gentleman, however, the sign simply read, "Doug." That reflects Doug Emhoff's public persona as a sort of Ringo-esque goofball who merits first-name terms. He just seems like a Doug, with its overtones of solid Gen X dependability. The familiarity also gestured to Emhoff's potential to be a quietly transformative figure in American politics. Female ambition is now the stuff of a million power breakfasts and lapel badges. But if Kamala Harris becomes America's first female president, her husband will break the real hardest glass ceiling in American politics. Behold, a man who is content to be the supporting actor in someone else's drama. Oh, just like every little girl dreams. The politics of gender and race are the inevitable backdrop to this year's convention. During the honorary roll call on Tuesday night, several delegates mentioned their pride at nominating a woman of color. During the speeches, Shirley Chisholm's name was regularly invoked as the first woman and first black American to seek the presidential nomination from one of the two major parties. In the corridors of the United Center, delegates could buy sugar pink Madam President t-shirts. Wow. 60 years ago, Fannie Lou Hamer came to this convention in 1964 and was denied entry to sit as a delegate because she was a black woman. The actor Wendell Pierce, who came with the Louisiana delegation, told me on the convention floor. To think that 60 years later we just nominated a black woman to lead the party, that is a tribute to that legacy. But is it really that thing that the most powerful people in the party did undemocratically out of pure desperation? Is that really a tribute to Fannie Lou Hamer? For real, they just interview actors now and try to find out what actors think. Yet Harris's campaign has so far left it to others to present her as a history-making proposition, presumably because they think that the idea alienates some voters and leaves many more unmoved. Well, I don't feel alienated. I am, as a matter of fact, unmoved. There's absolutely nothing about Kamala Harris being a colored woman. I mean, woman of color. It's okay when you say it that way, not the other way. Everybody knows that. I don't even know what happened. I'm just saying I'm not moved by it, nor does it matter to me that she's a woman. I mean, I guess it's a little annoying being nagged about voting for a woman all the time. I've done it before. I don't need to do it again. I've already got my street cred on woman voting. And as a matter of fact, I've got my street cred on black voting too. So ipso facto, I'm not racist or sexist. Don't have to prove it with a Kamala thing. I remain unmoved. But back to the Atlantic. Let the right obsess about the cultural implications of rampaging, untamable hordes of childless women. The thinking seems to go. While we get back to talking about how Donald Trump is a convicted felon, well, not for long, lady. You can call Donald Trump a convicted felon for a little longer, but then that goes away. You will always be childless cat ladies. Arguments about race and gender have been handled by carefully chosen surrogates. On the first night, Hillary Clinton gave a well-received personal speech about the advances made by women in her lifetime, starting with her mother's birth in an era when women could not yet vote in the United States. Oprah Winfrey spoke about the first children to go to desegregated schools and how they paved the way for the young Kamala, the daughter of a Jamaican father and an Indian mother. Michelle Obama, meanwhile, gave one of the angriest, most straightforwardly political speeches she has ever delivered, unleashing a stream of barely veiled attacks on Trump, condemning the, quote, affirmative action of generational wealth, end quote, and those who see a mountain ahead of them and, quote, expect there to be an escalator to take them to the top. Oh, thinly veiled. Was that about Donald Trump? Couldn't tell. It's crazy that Big Mike is making your angriest and most straightforwardly political speech, especially because she's not running for fake president, not now, and not in 2 or 3 weeks either. But the point is that Hillary Clinton, Oprah Winfrey, and Michelle Obama, they made the case to the nation on behalf of women everywhere as to why Donald Trump must be defeated by someone, anyone. Doesn't matter if it's Kamala. Someone's got to do it. And if you decide that it's not Kamala, well, we're all here. Hillary, Oprah, the adoptive mother of 2 prop children. What a smorgasbord of female talent and inspiration. The Democrat desire to tread lightly around gender can also be seen in the convention's treatment of abortion, a significant mover of votes in the midterms, fake, which has consistently been framed as a men's issue too. What? That reads like an attempt to turn abortion rights from a radical feminist demand into an everyday issue of freedom and family. The first night featured Josh Zarowski talking alongside his wife Amanda about her difficulty in accessing medical treatment for a miscarriage because of Texas's draconian laws. The couple was followed by Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear addressing the same theme, which was also part of his successful re-election campaign last year in a stolen election in Kentucky. Headlining the third night, Harris's running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, talked about fertility treatments and reused one of the most popular lines from his stump speech advising Republicans to mind your own damn business. And that would be a very good argument if there weren't 1 million abortions per year being performed in the United States, with an untold amount of that aborted fetal tissue being sold into a market that uses it as an input, including for things like vaccines and in the development of food products. But that's been debunked, or at least hopefully that's been debunked. I mean, they say it's been debunked, but does that mean it's been debunked? And if it hasn't been debunked, ooh. And what's that? Oh yeah, it hasn't been debunked. They just say it's not allowed to happen. The official launch of Brand Doug and the Emhoff family has an obvious aim: to normalize the idea of a female president with a supportive husband. I guess this is some kind of really underhanded knock at Bill Clinton. Didn't this already happen? Wasn't there already the idea of a female president with a supportive husband? I guess the word supportive is doing all the work here. So you want to hear about Doug? Arizona delegate Joshua Polachek said when I entered the scrum on the convention floor ahead of Emhoff's speech. We had just heard Chuck Schumer speak, and Polachek was disappointed that the Senate Majority Leader had missed the opportunity for a joke. As a Jewish boy myself, I thought he was going to say, if you dream big one day as a nice Jewish boy, you can be the first gentleman of the United States. Man, that joke would have crushed. The unspoken backdrop to that joke is an online right that is obsessed with emasculation. Listen to enough Manosphere podcasts or watch enough TikToks, and you will become familiar with a whole set of anxieties: falling sperm counts, low testosterone levels, male status hierarchies, with a whole vocabulary to match. Been mogged by a Sigma? Try looks maxing and don't be a cuck. I guess those are examples of what the language is. The advances made by women in the past few decades have made some men feel unheard and left behind, and have convinced many teenage boys that it's their sex that gets a raw deal. The Republican convention just a few weeks ago offered a buffet of macho role models, such as the wrestler Hulk Hogan, singer Kid Rock, and UFC boss Dana White. At the podium in Chicago, both Winfrey and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who is gay, married, and purchased 2 children, mentioned the Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance's cruel comments about childless cat ladies, drawing applause from the floor. As a trans woman, I certainly fall outside of the traditional gender binary, New Jersey delegate Joe A. Perella told me. Womanhood is not determined about whether or not a person can have children or if they do have children. Yeah, you see, men can be women too. To counteract the gender gap in polling, which sees men prefer Trump to Harris by double digits, which apparently is just a factor of their sexism, the Democrats are pushing their own model of masculinity, the dude who is relaxed and secure enough to take pride in his wife's achievements. The left has developed its own phrase book of wife guys and girl dads to communicate the virtue of being proud of the women around you. Among the foremost qualities of a political dad, whether of girls or boys, is his ability to take a joke. Witness Walz's kids doing bunny ears behind him on the first night, or Barack Obama ribbing him about his flannel shirts. Oh, ha ha ha! Funny moments of content. Thank goodness they set those up for exactly this reason. The shirts don't come from some consultant. They come from his closet, and they've been through some stuff, Obama said, while Glenn Walz nodded in the cutaways. Dads do not fear mockery because they live to embarrass their children, preferably by dancing in public. Dads have nothing to prove. Dads hug. Remember, everybody, how the adults are back in the room? Wait till Xi and Putin get a load of this. Tim Walz prancing in a flannel with a camo hat on. Go to DEFCON 1. In a similar vein, Tuesday night was the domain of the alpha wife guy. Men who have achieved enough themselves to be able to revel in their partner's successes. Barack Obama famously watched his wife write 2 best-selling books, while he struggled to finish one after leaving office. Can you believe it? I mean, Barack Obama did have a best-selling book before he became president that he may have even taken part in writing. And it's possible that real people actually bought it. And Michelle Obama, of course, no one would even know who Michelle Obama is, at least as far as Michelle Obama's public persona is concerned, without Barack Obama having already been famous. Michelle Obama is legitimately only riding Barack Hussein Obama's coattails to be able to sell any books at all. Otherwise, no one would care. So what is this lunatic in the Atlantic talking about? Obama, celebrating his submissiveness, said, "I am the only person stupid enough to speak after Michelle Obama." In case you think it was all high-minded feminism, Obama also made a joke at Trump's expense when he said the former president was obsessed with crowd sizes. You get it? It's like penis sizes. A strange thing to focus on when you're a closeted homosexual who's married to a man. And I know, it's a conspiracy theory that Michelle Obama is a man. It is not remotely a conspiracy theory that Barack Obama is gay. It is also not a conspiracy theory that neither of those children came out of Michelle Obama. Those things are proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. But let's continue. Emhoff, meanwhile, used to be a Los Angeles entertainment lawyer, but gave it up to avoid conflicts of interest when Harris became vice president. He now teaches at Georgetown University. He exemplifies what all men should do. When your lady needs to take the lead, let her take the lead. Pierce told me. He's emblematic of what good men are. This actor really knows what he's talking about. To offset any suggestion that he might be a henpecked homebody, Emhoff's speech referenced his childhood buddies, his fantasy football league, and his group chat. "It's probably blowing up right now," he said. The video before his speech zoomed in on his face in footage showing him grabbing a protester who had taken the mic from Harris at a live event. In his speech, Walz adopted the same tone, boasting about being a good shot, comparing his words to a football pep talk, and exiting to a Neil Young song. As he spoke, the audience waved signs that read, "Coach Walz." And see that? They've replaced traditional, authentic masculinity with symbols that express a sense of traditional, authentic masculinity because, of course, they themselves don't exhibit any of that. This is the sort of thing you can do in the false reality layer. Now, I like fantasy football, but I'm not going to pretend it's manly. You're playing a game that creates a non-physical competition where you accumulate points based on what other men are actually doing. Exiting to a Neil Young song doesn't have anything to do with masculinity at all. That sort of derangement makes me wonder if Baudrillard didn't go far enough in simulacra and simulation. This is beyond pure simulacrum. Neil Young music on speakers in an arena as a stand-in for traditional authentic masculinity. Maybe he should have exited to a Limp Bizkit song wearing a baseball cap backwards. Back to the Atlantic. Apart from its specifically masculine touches, the The second gentleman's speech closely followed the classic First Lady template. Mindful of the bad headlines suffered by Hillary Clinton for her wide-ranging interest in politics, First Ladies since have tended to limit their interventions to a single issue. Laura Bush picked education, Michelle Obama focused on childhood nutrition, and with no apparent self-awareness, Melania Trump launched a short-lived anti-bullying campaign. And speaking of no apparent self-awareness, wannabe elite women have waged a 9-year-long bullying campaign against Melania Trump. They identify Donald Trump as a bad man and a bully. Therefore, Melania Trump doesn't have the standing to focus on that issue. That is what we're being told. Since the Hamas attacks on Israel last October and the wave of protests that followed, Emhoff has spoken out on anti-Semitism. Some Jewish delegates expressed their approval by waving First Mensch signs during his speech. And that's weird, isn't it? Didn't we just talk the other day about how the BLM Antifa protesters outside, the pro-Hamas protesters outside, were in every way foot soldiers of this very same regime being used to make Kamala Harris look relatively palatable to the quote-unquote Jewish community. Kamala Harris, most liberal woman in the Senate, big supporter of BLM Antifa, big supporter of leftist street action, just decided not to make the Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, her running mate, has to burnish her image with the Jews somehow. So the protest movement comes in, and then Doug Emhoff is First Mensch. He spoke out against anti-Semitism. What a hero. He hit the other beats too. Humanize the candidate with behind-the-scenes anecdotes, tell your love story, and claim that despite running for office, your spouse believes that their most important job will always be as a parent. Pause for audience to dab eyes. She's always been there for our children, Emhoff told the audience about his wife, and I know she'll always be there for yours too. But Kamala Harris doesn't actually have any children. And Doug Emhoff's daughter looks like she has brain damage and is ready to join Antifa herself. Harris and Emhoff met in 2013. The daughter, Ella, was 14 years old. The son, Cole, was already 18. And Kamala Harris already had a full-time job in politics. I'm not even trying to knock her here, but there is absolutely no way that at any point Kamala Harris thought that her most important job was being a parent to a 14-year-old and 18-year-old that weren't hers. All of this is myth-making. They're just trying to create a different reality and sell it to everyone. Let's close this out. Theirs is a blended family, a setup that is far from unusual in modern America, but clearly triggering to some on the right, even though Trump has a blended family too. Perhaps, but Trump also has real children, including with the person he's married to. Despite the painful circumstances of Emhoff's divorce, his first wife is now enough of a friend that she has produced a campaign advertisement for him, narrated by their son. All the Emhoffs, Kirsten, Cole, and Ella, have been present at the convention to support Doug. And in writing that sentence, I just realized something else, that it's important to notice the dog that doesn't bark. 3 decades after Hillary Rodham agonized over taking her husband's name, absolutely no one seems to care that Kamala Harris isn't an Emhoff. Underneath all the sound and fury, an idea that was once considered radical has slipped into silent acceptance. Well, perhaps, or maybe it's just that no one takes Kamala Harris seriously. Now, that is certainly one of the craziest and stupidest things I have ever read. They are trying to take the features that are the opposite of traditional, authentic masculinity and invert them. Barack Obama, Tim Walz, Doug Emhoff, they are actually so masculine that they don't need to exhibit any of the characteristics of traditional, authentic masculinity at all. In fact, the proof of their uber masculinity is how easily they will submit to the woman in their life, even if she's not a woman, so long as it means they both can continue to get more powerful. Now, I want to be clear that it is a perfectly masculine thing to support the women in your life, whether it's your employer or your employee, your mother, your sister, your girlfriend, your wife, your running mate. It is well within the range of traditional, authentic masculinity to be supportive to the women in your life. But if that is the only traditional and authentically masculine thing you do, that alone is not going to get you there. And when one of the major pillars of your political agenda is to invert the idea of a difference between the sexes, you're really going to have to do a whole lot better than saying the thing that makes you traditionally, authentically masculine is how much you support women. Your entire party has formally decided it doesn't know what women are, and that no one's allowed to say without being a biologist. That's like being at dinner and asking, hey, can you pass the salt? And the person handing you pepper. And you're like, no, I don't want pepper. I have plenty of pepper. I asked for the salt. And rather than handing you salt, they just said, well, that pepper, it's a new kind of salt. You sprinkle it on food just like salt. It's a new kind of salt. I think you'll like it better. You won't even miss the old kind because now we have this new kind. And hey, what's that? Is that Pink performing? Is that a female pop star performing? My goodness, it's going to be fabulous. How traditionally and authentically masculine this whole thing is. Honestly, who do these people think they're catering to? And I am saying this as a former Democrat who used to find some of this appealing, particularly the crossover between politics and pop culture, because that was a big part of my life. People were seeking power and trying to entertain themselves. I spend a lot of time trying to view pretty much everything through my perspective now, but also my perspective back then. I ask myself what I would have thought about these presentations back then, and occasionally I'll also think, what if I had never gotten out of that mindset? What would it be like now? And would I be able to even try to support this? And I think the answer is no. And I think the answer is becoming no for a lot of people who could still get on board with this just a couple years ago. It's getting so embarrassing and so absurd. They're losing all their demographics. Even in that Atlantic piece, that writer mentioned polling she had seen that showed Trump up over Harris in the double digits among men. That's half the population. Where are they going to get the women to make up for that? And of course they won't. And that's not the only demographic they're losing. Every part of the traditional Democrat base is disappearing from the Democrat Party. Young people, minorities, immigrants. And the truth is, whatever poll she read is skewed against Trump. There's no way we're going to have a real legitimate election this year that shows only 55% male support for Trump and 45% for Kamala Harris. It's insane. They are losing their base. The people they have traditionally been identified with are turning away from them in droves. So their reaction is to stage this massive television extravaganza where they feature nothing but those groups constantly in an attempt to remind all of America about their identification with those groups. They want to say, to broadcast to America, all of these groups are still ours. Just look how electric this room is as we pander to them. They're trying to convince the entire country that Kamala Harris is the most popular presidential candidate of all time, despite having absolutely nothing to prove it anywhere. No support for a presidential run in 2019. The worst approval ratings in the fake news polls of any vice president in history. No primaries, no debates, no interviews, no votes, no delegates, no states won. No process whatsoever. Just one day she's the new presidential candidate for this fake election. And then they just begin airing a television show to convince everyone that she is actually popular. Now, I do want to hit just a couple other things quickly before we close this out. I talked on the live stream yesterday about this article in Newsweek. Donald Trump accused of committing massive crime with reported phone call. And so if you were on the live stream yesterday, forgive me, I want to quickly recap some of what we discussed. From this article, Donald Trump has been accused of violating federal law by the American Muckrakers PAC after allegations were made he called Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, to discuss the ceasefire deal the U.S. is helping negotiate between Israel and Hamas. The former president allegedly made the call on August 14th, according to Axios, and repeated in Reuters, which cited two unnamed, quote, U.S. sources who were briefed on the call, end quote. This claim was reported again by PBS host Judy Woodruff on Tuesday, who said, quote, the reporting is that former President Trump is on the phone with the Prime Minister of Israel, urging him not to cut a deal right now because it's believed that would help the Harris campaign, end quote. Both Netanyahu's office and Trump denied that the call took place. In a statement quoted by the Times of Israel, a spokesperson said, contrary to media reports, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not speak yesterday with former President Donald Trump. During a press conference in New Jersey on August 15th, Trump denied the phone call happened and said the last time he spoke to Netanyahu was when the Israeli prime minister visited him at Mar-a-Lago on July 26th. I did encourage him to get this over with. You want to get it over with fast. Have victory, get your victory, and get it over with. It has to stop. The killing has to stop, Trump said. Woodruff has since apologized for her comments, saying it was not based on original reporting and that she had not seen later reporting that the story had been denied by Israel and Trump. This was a mistake and I apologize for it, Woodruff said. Now, the insinuation here by Woodruff is that Donald Trump went out of his way to call Benjamin Netanyahu and suggest that Netanyahu delay a ceasefire until after the election because the delay of that ceasefire would help Donald Trump in his campaign and hurt Joe Biden, which hurts Kamala Harris. So essentially, Donald Trump was willing to accept another 2.5 months of indiscriminate killing and who knows how many deaths among innocent people in order to benefit his campaign, in order to somehow get more very real votes in this very real election. An election in which he doesn't actually need any more real, lawful American votes because he has more than enough, by a long shot, a landslide, but still, Donald Trump would accept more death between Israel and Palestine to squeeze out another 0.2%. It's like all those Trump deranged people blaming him for the COVID vaccines, claiming that $1 million donation to his inaugural fund in 2016 made the billionaire sign on to a genocide. Here is what Woodruff said. I want to clarify my remarks on the PBS News special on Monday night about the ongoing ceasefire talks in the Middle East. As I said, this was not based on my original reporting. I was referring to reports I had read in Axios and Reuters about former President Trump having spoken to the Israeli prime minister. In the live TV moment, I repeated the story because I hadn't seen later reporting that both sides denied it. This was a mistake, and I apologize for it. And to be clear, both sides had denied it 4 days prior. But imagine how this story would have gone a decade ago or 15 years ago. Imagine how it would have gone 5 years ago compared to now. This is a lot like the suckers and losers hoax. This is a lot like the Russian bounties hoax. A fake story they used to make Donald Trump look bad and uncaring, to reinforce all the false narratives they have built up about Donald Trump over the last 9 years. But why do they do this? Why this particular story? Well, they want to blame Donald Trump for a delay in the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Is Donald Trump launching those quote unquote attacks that keep delaying the ceasefire? Is Donald Trump seeding all the narratives about how the conflict will be escalated and expanded? Nope. That's the same people feeding stories to the press just like this one. It's almost like they want to delay the ceasefire, but don't want to take that responsibility on themselves because it would look bad during the campaign. I mean, Joe Biden's the real president, right? Can't he work toward the ceasefire? Antony Blinken was just over there trying to achieve a ceasefire. But that hasn't worked, and of course, Antony Blinken and Joe Biden have no leverage. And that's not acceptable. The Democrat base demands peace, just like they did for Ukraine. I mean, that's what all the BLM Antifa protesters are at the DNC for. They are demanding peace on behalf of Hamas. And if Biden and Harris can't make any progress on that in the next 2 months, they'll probably lose their Antifa base too. And then there's the other side of the issue. Newsweek was reporting it as a potential violation of the Logan Act. That's the massive crime in this scenario. And I'll just go quickly through this. If Trump did make the call, there have been suggestions that this would potentially break the Logan Act, which prohibits unauthorized private citizens from negotiating with foreign governments on behalf of the U.S. It's highly unlikely that any action will be taken against the former president. Only 2 people have ever been charged with violating the Logan Act, one in 1803 and the other in 1852. Neither individual was prosecuted. American Muckrakers, a political action committee known for its aggressive tactics in targeting Republican politicians, has filed a request with the U.S. DOJ and the U.S. Department of State. So supposedly Donald Trump made this call, and this call would be a violation of the Logan Act because he was conducting foreign policy as a private citizen on behalf of the United States, and we are supposed to pretend that Donald Trump is a private citizen. But why are they getting so upset about it now? Netanyahu traveled to Mar-a-Lago to see Donald Trump a month ago, and he's been meeting with foreign leaders throughout the time that Joe Biden has been pretending to be president. Newsweek in this article is, again, quoting actors. Actor Stephen Pasquale said it was pretty balls-to-the-wall treason. And the Lincoln Project said, "Stop Trump, break MAGA, and save America. There's absolutely no line he won't cross." And some DNC member said the allegation would be a massive crime if true. Except it's not true. Trump denies it. Netanyahu denies it. There's no proof the call happened. It was reported by 2 unnamed sources who talked to Axios. One of their sources actually said Trump was encouraging Netanyahu to take the deal, but also that he had no idea what their conversation actually was. So let's try to break this down and make it real simple. The fake news made up a story designed to make it look like Donald Trump was going to accept 2.5 months more of indiscriminate killing in the Middle East in order to help him win a few very real votes in a very real election. And that this conversation constituted a violation of the Logan Act, a massive crime, balls-to-the-wall treason, the sort of behavior that could only be acted out by someone for whom there are no lines left to cross. You got to wonder why the regime is trying to get out of this whole thing right now and pin it on Donald Trump when they've done nothing but support this for the last 10 months. And the same holds true of Ukraine, a cause they've championed for the last 2.5 years. They're actually trying to spark the whole thing up again to increase their negotiating leverage. We continue to be told about this very bad incident in Ukraine. Ukraine has actually taken over this chunk of Russian territory. Don't call it a comeback yet, but Ukraine is now on the offensive. Here's CNN today trying to reset the whole official story about Russia and Ukraine. And as you listen to this, particularly in the second half of the video, you have to understand that the regions they're discussing, Donetsk in particular, part of Russia since 2022. The people of those regions voted in referenda to become part of Russia. The international community pretends that didn't happen and that those elections are illegitimate, but they don't actually have the power to enforce their viewpoint in any way, and there's no reason whatsoever to believe they're right in the first place. These are the same people who still pretend that Crimea is part of Ukraine. That hasn't been true for a decade. But here it is, the most trusted name in news. The headline is, "Video shows aftermath of Ukraine's latest attacks inside Russia."
is intensifying in both countries. Russian defense officials say Ukraine launched another cross-border drone attack overnight with targets including a military airfield. We're also learning that Moscow is ramping up efforts to protect civilians in the city of Kursk more than 2 weeks into Kyiv's surprise incursion there. Meanwhile, Russian forces are advancing faster than expected towards a key city in eastern Ukraine, and local officials are issuing a stark warning, urging people in nearby communities to get out as soon as they can. Let's take a look a bit closer now with CNN Salma Abdelaziz joining me from London. So what is the latest on those Ukrainian attacks on Russian soil?
Absolutely. So straight to that advance in Kursk, where Russian officials are now building shelters, concrete shelters to house families that need safety from this incoming Ukrainian advance. Kyiv, of course, says it continues. It insists on pushing through that advance in an attempt to try to inflict serious damage on Russia's war machine. They've taken out key bridges in that area. They've attacked then the pontoon bridges that Russian troops have put in those places and continue to push forward. But 2 weeks into this now no longer surprise assault, of course, Russia has been able to regroup, rearm, refortify, and Ukrainian forces now saying they are facing tough resistance. And it's not just the Kursk region that is of concern. Ukrainian officials fear that Russian troops are now focusing ever more on eastern Ukraine in the Donetsk region, where there is a massive push by Russian troops that is forcing hundreds of Ukrainians to leave their homes. President Zelensky addressing this last night. Take a listen to what he said.
The front line, our positions, primarily in the Pokrovsk direction, our Donetsk region. We understand the enemy's moves and we are strengthening our defenses. A review of ammunition supplies has been conducted. It's very important that our partners fully meet their commitments regarding every package and all our agreements. This is fundamental for defense.
You hear him there speaking specifically on the Pervutsk region. That's, again, in eastern Ukraine. I want to read you a quote from a local official there to residents saying, "Don't wait. It will not get better. It will only get worse. Leave." That's a very stark warning, a very serious fears that Russian troops will only continue to push, only continue to advance in that region. Meanwhile, of course, you have that continued tit-for-tat drone attacks that are occurring. Yesterday, Moscow's mayor saying that the city faced the largest, or one of the largest drone attacks it's ever seen from Ukraine. There were also, according to Russian officials, attacks on a military site near the border in Volgograd by Ukrainian drones. And then, of course, drones going the other way as well. Ukraine saying that dozens of drones were fired at the capital. So you have that continuing war, that shadow war, if you will, the drones going back and forth between these two countries as that front line shifts, shapes, and changes while Russian troops move and maneuver to try to meet this assault in Kursk, but continue to push through to what is important and strategically key for Moscow, which is eastern Donetsk.
So at the site of the major surprise attack, Russia has already refortified and rearmed, and that's not working. The comedic actor in Ukraine wants to be sure that all the partners, all the allies are meeting their commitments in terms of ammo and ammunitions. He's probably going to need more money soon. And then in that eastern region of Ukraine that has been Russia for 2 years, the Ukrainians now need to escape. So we get this surprise attack out of absolutely nowhere a couple of weeks ago inside Russian territory. Now, at no point in the last 2.5 years have the Ukrainians done anything productive. But all of a sudden, with their forces depleted, waiting on armaments from all these other parts of the world, the average age of their military, 43 years old, they're ripping people out of their homes. They're demanding that Ukrainians in other countries come back and fight for the Ukrainian army while everybody in Kyiv is still partying and doing weird shit. Ukraine is making a comeback in Kursk, except it's been thwarted now. And they're getting crushed elsewhere, too. And by the way, we talked about this on the live stream yesterday. But the Battle of Kursk, the end of the Battle of Kursk, a Russian defeat of Nazis in World War II, that was 81 years ago tomorrow. The CNN broadcast had these red areas that Russia had taken over. And then it had these tiny little yellow areas that were the areas Ukraine took back from Russia. And the size of the red against the size of the yellow is at least 100 to 1. And then there's this today in The Economist, one of the official propaganda outlets of the global regime and the Rothschilds specifically. The Kremlin is close to crushing a vital Ukrainian town. The subheadline, even as Ukraine raids Russia, it is losing another key battle. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but let's get a little bit of this flavor. The crossroads town of Pokrovsk, population 59,000, has had a front row seat on the full-scale Russian invasion since 2022. But it is only in the past month that its future has come under serious threat. Russia views its capture as a strategic goal, opening up advances toward the big cities of Dnipro and Zaporozhye. Well, Zaporozhye is the place where they have controlled the nuclear power plant safely for longer than the last 2.5 years. The stuff is crazy. Ukraine's great hope was that a surprise Kursk offensive would relieve the pressure. If anything, Russia's advance has accelerated. Don't call it a comeback. Pokrovsk is readying for a nasty new phase of war. The regional police and local administration have moved out. 2 supermarkets have closed, and the rest will probably follow. Locals queue outside banks and pension offices, rushing to do business while they still can. Inside the town, cars race at high speed. On August 19th, authorities urged residents to leave. Many are heeding the advice, departing with roof racks full of family heirlooms, fridges, Christmas trees, sofas, chairs, mattresses, with grandmothers squashed on the back seat. After 2.5 years, this is it. Grab the synthetic Christmas tree. We're out of here. Ukrainian commanders give different reasons for the Russian advance. Some say there aren't enough shells, with the enemy firing up to 10 times as many. Others point to Russian tactics, small infantry assaults, glide bombs, new types of electronic warfare. But exhaustion and manpower issues seem to be at the heart of the collapse. People aren't made of steel, says Colonel Pavlo Fedosenko. Ukrainian troops outnumbered 4 to 1 aren't getting any rest, he says. Some stay on the front lines for 30 or 40 days at a time, cramped in foxholes, inches from death. Dublin, a fighter attached to the 59th Brigade southeast of Pokrovsk, knows soldiers who have been in place for more than 2 months. 2 had strokes. Ukraine's problems are compounded by, quote-unquote, idiotic orders, he said. Ukraine's surprise mini-invasion of Russia provokes mixed feelings. Dublin says early successes lifted morale, but it didn't last. The hope that Russia might respond by moving troops from Pokrovsk has been supplanted by the realization that it has not. Ukrainian security sources confirm that while Russia has moved troops from other sections of the eastern front line, it reinforced around Pokrovsk. Ukraine, meanwhile, redeployed special forces units to Kursk and is patching up the Pokrovsk front line with untested formations. The Russians have figured things out and aren't taking the bait, complains Dublin. The defenders of Pokrovsk are reluctant to say how long they can hold out. The Russians may take weeks or months to get past outlying towns like Mirnohrad, Selyadov, and Ukrainsk, all now haunted by drones, artillery, and bomber planes. The advance has slowed since August 19th, says Alexander, in the last 2 days, a drone commander with the 110th Brigade who watches the battlefield from his screens. But the Russians have a habit of pouncing on weak spots to devastating effect, he warns, and it seems only a matter of time before Pokrovsk is crushed, like Mariupol, Bakhmut, and Avdiivka. What happens is an open question. Control of Pokrovsk and a short advance to the administrative borders of the Donetsk region might be enough for Vladimir Putin to claim a political victory and start serious negotiations. It might not. Much will depend on whether Ukraine can hold on to the chunk of Russia it now occupies as a bargaining chip in those future talks. And they're talking about Kursk, where, according to CNN and this very article, they've already been defeated. But listen to this again. They are admitting that this failed surprise mini invasion, even though they're getting routed on the front lines everywhere, and don't have troops and don't have ammo, this surprise mini invasion could be a bargaining chip against Putin if they can hold the territory, which they can't. I'll read it again. What happens then is an open question. Control of Pokrovsk and a short advance to the administrative borders of the Donetsk region might be enough for Vladimir Putin to claim a political victory and start serious negotiations. It might not. Much will depend on whether Ukraine can hold on to the chunk of Russia it now occupies as a bargaining chip in those future talks. So look back over the last 2.5 years. There are, of course, claims in the central narrative, official stories about how Ukraine has had successes. They have those tiny little yellow areas on CNN's map. And there's that story about how Kyiv was able to hold off the Russian offensive way back at the beginning of the conflict. Russia actually withdrew from that part of Ukraine as part of a deal they had already agreed to. And then Ukraine broke that deal. There was never any military defeat there or anywhere else. They have made up story after story after story of their successes. They have made up story after story after story of Russian atrocities. But at no point has any of it ever worked. Vladimir Putin has never backed down. Russia never folded, not to the economic sanctions, not to anything that happened in Ukraine. And we are supposed to believe that a couple weeks ago, they launched a surprise mini invasion and have taken over a piece of Russia that they plan to hold and use as a bargaining chip. Ukraine can't hold any of their territory, but they're going to hold on to Russian territory, and that's going to make the Russians back down. They're going to hold it and use it as a bargaining chip. But wait, that's not all. That's not the only reason why we're getting these stories about a conflict in Kursk that is at best intentionally overinflated in its importance to a farcical level, if it's not just fake altogether. There's also this from Reuters today. Kursk nuclear power plant is one of Russia's top atomic power stations. And that's what the real bargaining chip is, isn't it? They've been gunning for a nuclear disaster narrative for 2.5 years now. They have been seeding it. They have been running reruns every 3 months or so about Zaporozhye. They even tried, strangely, at the beginning in early 2022, to do it about Chernobyl. But since then, it's been all Zaporozhye. Now they're opening up an entirely new nuclear threat in Kursk. They have to get one somewhere. Everyone understands by this point that Russia's not actually going to attack anyone with nuclear weapons. Those stories sound ridiculous now. And so what we end up with instead is either a preemptive nuclear strike, in quotes, against Russia. That would be a narrative in an attempt to get everyone back on the same page about war with Russia, or the creation of a nuclear power plant disaster that then would be responded to by Russia with nuclear weapons. And the comedic actor has admitted this as well. He said the incursion into Kursk would be a way to end the war on Ukraine's terms. But what could that even mean? None of it's on Ukraine's terms. It's never going to be on Ukraine's terms. And the Russian Foreign Ministry came out immediately after the Kursk narrative began and said this ends any possibility of Russia negotiating with Ukraine. So I would suggest that in both cases, Israel and Ukraine, what we are seeing is a regime desperate to end these narrative storylines and get wins for their side, which in this case would be Joe Biden initially, or Kamala Harris for now, and then whoever might replace Kamala Harris. Because they're not going to come out and just admit that these massive war efforts were a huge disaster. They're going to rebrand them. I'll be back tomorrow at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.